On today's episode of LockOn Wild, we examine what happens if Kirill Kaprizov decides he doesn't want to wait for the Wild to be competitive again.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Locked On Wild. We are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We're going to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go, now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we examine what happens if the Wild take too long to put together a playoff caliber, Stanley Cup caliber team around Kirill Kaprizov, and he hits the eject button, and the Wild have to make a decision. We're going Doomsday Scenario tonight, so we'll take a look at what you would have to be able to get if Kaprizov is indeed not going to stick around. We'll look at some previous trades to see what sort of value you could get and whether it would be worthwhile to get a proven player or picks and prospects. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. Folks had a terrible week, and so I'm going to channel that energy into the Doomsday Scenario here because I'm in my feels, and so I am going to unintentionally ruin your Friday. Sorry about it. Look, we all know the stakes. We all know the stakes in the Kirill Kaprizov situation. Kaprizov is rapidly approaching coming due on a new contract. He is under contract for 2 more seasons, 2024, 2025, and then 2025, 2026. But there is something that is more pressing to the Kirill Kaprizov situation than a potential re-up on his contract. The fact that he gains a no-move clause in the final 2 years of the deal. And while it may be premature to say that he's out the door, it's got to be a legitimate concern. It has to be a major concern because, as I have said many times throughout the course of this year and the offseason as well, I believe Bill Guerin's job is tied exclusively to whether or not Kirill Kaprizov elects to stay. The most popular player in franchise history, the most prolific goal scorer in franchise history, a legitimate top player in the NHL, a superstar. Kirill Kaprizov is all of the things that you look for in a player that is the face of your organization and is one of the most exciting players to watch in the entirety of the NHL. They don't come around often. Look at the Minnesota Wild's history. Those players don't come around often. The Wild had a player who came close in Marian Gaborik, but what happened there? Gaborik wanted to see how his play translated to the Bright Lights of New York. And the Minnesota Wild did not get a thing for him. He left via free agency, and the Wild got nothing in return. If you suffer a similar fate, you are going to have a lot of fans that are going to up and leave as well. So it's got to be something that keeps people in the organization up at night trying to figure out how to field a roster around Kirill Kaprizov that is going to make him want to stay here long term. You have to be prepared, though, as much as you don't want to. We see this in every walk of life. You have to be prepared for the worst case scenario in the event that things don't go according to plan. again, you can't have this happen twice in your franchise's existence. You can't have two players of that caliber of talent. And let's be perfectly clear too. As good as Marian Gaborik was, Kirill Kaprizov is head and shoulders better than Gaborik was. And he's also able to stay healthy for the most part. So this would be a more egregious offense if you don't at least get a reputable haul for Kaprizov. If he does decide that he can't win here with this team, he, in exit interviews, he seemed to take it personal that this team did not make the playoffs. And so to commit that offense 2 years in a row, and look, it's a roster that is far from competing, if we're being completely honest. You look at everything that has happened in the Stanley Cup playoffs so far, and it is just painfully apparent how far this team is from being legitimate cup contenders, which is where the young prospects that we have started to see really are kind of the last line of hope for keeping Kaprizov here beyond his current deal. The players, the likes of Liam Ogren, Marat Huznadinov, to a much larger extent, Danil Yurov, who elected to stay in the KHL for another season because, for one, money, but for two, roster opportunities. And so, like, I get that you really have no choice but to continue to try to field a playoff caliber team while Kaprizov is here. I get that. I would argue that that is not being done to a full capacity with some of the players that are currently occupying roster spots. Our original plan today was to do an amnesty clause similar to what the NBA does or did, where you could just wave a magic wand and a contract would come off the books. You could do it once. That was our original plan today, but no. We are going to confront the monster in the closet. We're going to confront the skeletons under the bed, because if we go through these next 2 years without having even discussed the possibility, that's a disservice on my part. So we are going to look, and again, Bill Guerin has full control over how this plays out between now and the end of Kirill Kaprizov's current contract. It is on him to put together as quality of a roster as he can. And honestly, we're going to talk about this with Alex on Monday. I saw a really interesting discussion on Hockey Wilderness stemming from an article that they did, which basically insinuated that the reason that John Hines stacked the lineup was to show Bill Guerin how thin this roster is, especially on lines 2 and 3. I'm going to elaborate further because I want to give full credit to the writer of the article, because it's fascinating that you could have a head coach that would basically say, "Hey, I'm gonna show the warts for this roster in plain view." Justin Hine of Hockey Wilderness. So we'll talk about this with Alex for Monday. Fascinating discussion topic, but hopefully it was an illuminating point for Bill Guerin, because there are warts on this roster, to say the least. And if you are going to convince your franchise superstar to hang around, you've got to get your hands really dirty here over the next 2 seasons. And I'm trying to attack this not from a gloom and doom perspective, but from a friendly nag perspective. Like, hey, I'm telling you right now, it's like, how many of us have been in this situation? You go to a friend's house and you're on a street that has the every other night, even odd parking. Anybody have a familiar story from this? You go to a friend's house, you park on the wrong side of the street. They know it. They tell you, hey, I'm telling you right now, if you don't move your car, you're going to get a ticket. And you say, like, this is at 3:00 in the afternoon when you first get to the house. You say, it's fine. I'll just move it later. And you forget to move it. And then not only do you get a ticket, but it snows and your car gets towed. I am just simply trying to throw fair warning out there. This is a possibility. And this is a possibility that needs to be front and center in everyone's mind over these next two seasons, especially the GM and the owner, because you're going to make a lot of people very angry if requisite steps aren't taken to ensure that a franchise superstar is happy enough to stay. So let's entertain the possibility that he is not. By looking at what teams have done in similar situations over the last several seasons, including a trade for a very proven scorer that absolutely mothballed. We will talk about that as we continue today's episode of LockOn Wild after this. Today's episode of LockOn Wild is brought to you by FanDuel, folks. It is winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL playoffs, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. All you have to do is put $5 on, pick a team, any of the teams that are in action here this weekend. And if you get a win, for instance, Minnesota Timberwolves taking on the Denver Nuggets tomorrow night. Good opportunity right there. $5 bet. If you win, $150 in bonus bets are yours. No questions asked. Also this weekend, the Kentucky Derby. Now, don't take my advice on a horse, because the last 6 years I have picked the horse that finishes dead last in the Kentucky Derby. But that's another route you can go, is just put a $5 bet on something. And if you win, $150 of bonus bets are yours. No questions asked. That is $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's episode of LockOn Wild. Once again, we thank you for making LockOn Wild your first listen each and every day, or in the case of my work schedule all week, evening episodes. Appreciate everybody's patience. Hoping to get back to a regular schedule next week. We'll have more concrete content for you next week. We'll be hitting the draft heavy and player evals as well. So keep an eye out for that coming up for you next week here on LockOn Wild. Does everybody remember the Matthew Tkachuk, Jonathan Huberdeau trade that sent ripples through the NHL back on July 25th of 2022? It was an interesting situation because Tkachuk, a very, very, very good player, and Jonathan Huberdeau had just, I think, set some franchise records with the Florida Panthers. But the Panthers wanted to They wanted to bring Tkachuk into the mix and were willing to send Huberdeau to the Calgary Flames. Now, as far as the entirety of the trade and some interesting comments from the general managers here, as the Calgary Flames general manager at the time, Brad Treliving, said, quote, "I want to thank Matthew. I have a strong relationship with him. We drafted him as an 18-year-old player. We saw him grow up in this organization. He's been a special guy to this organization. He made a decision to move on. I appreciate his honesty. I appreciate him coming to that decision a week ago. This was not a plan that we had. We were not looking to move Matthew Tkachuk, but we were put in a situation we had to do the very best thing that we could for the organization. He chose the path to go down, and we had to facilitate as best as we possibly could." I mean, that's how it happens, folks. That's how it happens with players, high talent players that decide that they have hit their peak in a particular spot. They have hit the ceiling. They have hit the ceiling and they cannot go any further. And Matthew Tkachuk sent to the Florida Panthers for Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwindt, and a future pick. And so as Treliving continues, he said at the time he was informed that Matthew did not have an appetite and would not sign with the Calgary Flames long term. So going into the final few years of his deal, he decided, I'm out. I'm good. He outlined his reasons for this, ultimately made the decision and informed us that being a Calgary Flame long-term was not in his plans. Early on in the process, when we felt we had an opportunity to look at the types of players and impact of players we were able to get a deal done with, which was Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwindt, and a draft pick. And then Jonathan Huberdeau, like, going to the Calgary Flames, he had just an insane season with the Florida Panthers. He had 115 points in 80 games in 2021, 2022, 30 goals, 85 assists. He was a plus 35 on the season. And folks, he has not replicated those numbers in the two seasons since. He had 15 goals, 40 assists in 2022, 2023. Now that was the first year, or that was the final year of Daryl Sutter. And it was widely known that many players in the Flames organization did not get along with Daryl Sutter, Huberdeau especially. But this past season, he played in 81 games, had 12 goals and 40 assists. So he has, in 2 seasons since leaving Florida, he has 27 goals and 80 assists. Now, he is 30 years old, but a player of that age should still have plenty left in the tank. And yes, 2021, 2022 was absolutely the best version that you can get for Matthew Tkachuk. Jonathan Huberdeau, excuse me. That's absolutely like the top level that you can get for Jonathan Huberdeau. But that's a pretty steep drop between a 30-goal guy with 115 points to a 15-goal guy with 55 points. But that is the risk you take. If you get to this situation and you try to bring in proven talent to kind of keep you at the level that you were at, it's a risk. It is a big risk that leads to players not being able to fill that level of performance. And so that was a huge trade that worked out in Florida's favor tremendously. They have been a huge piece of the Eastern Conference puzzle over the last couple of seasons. And it's one of the biggest trades in recent memory, but is just a good example too of like, if you go the route of getting a player that is a proven commodity, don't be so sure that they're going to be able to keep that level of performance up in a new place. The way to go, as we will discuss quite a bit here in the final segment, the way to go is the package of players that can turn into more, that can give you the potential to lead to other things. So we will finish by taking a look at the other side of how this could go, which is picks and prospects, as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We're going to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, such as unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multiplayers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, for the everydayers, make sure to join us for Sunday's live show. We'll take all of your questions into Sunday's episode of Locked on Wild Live. So make sure to join us at noon on Sunday for plenty of Minnesota Wild talk. All right, so we're diving in to the Kaprizov conundrum here. If it is that Kaprizov decides he just can't do it here, you better make darn sure that you get enough for him. So let's look at some of the recent big trades that have netted a haul and a half. Let's go back to the Vegas Golden Knights, who acquired Jack Eichel from the Buffalo Sabres. Similar situation here. Jack Eichel not willing to stick around in Buffalo. He was traded along with a 2023 second-round pick to the Vegas Golden Knights in exchange for Alex Tuch, Peyton Krebs, a 2022 first-round pick, and a 2023 second-round pick. And we know all too well about Alex Tuch, a Minnesota Wild killer. But let's see how he has done since the trade took place. Tuch this past season, he had 22 goals, 37 assists, 59 points in 75 games. And since he came to Buffalo, his stats year by year, he had 12 goals in 50 games his first season. He had 36 goals in 2022-2023. He was a 79-point player in 74 games in 2022-2023. And then a step back this past season, 22 goals, 37 assists in 75 games. He's 27. And so that's just one of the pieces that the Sabres were able to get back in return. One of the other pieces of the trade was Peyton Krebs. And Krebs 23 years old. He played in 80 games this past season. He had 4 goals, 13 assists, 17 points since he went to this season. Last year, he had 9 goals in 74 games. He had 26 points in that 74-game span. And then the year he was traded to Buffalo, he had 7 goals, 15 assists, and 48 points in 22 points in 48 games. That reads to me, without knowing a ton behind it, that reads to me as somebody who plays lower in the lineup. So that was a situation where Buffalo did probably the best that they could, but that's not a particularly inspiring return for a guy in Jack Eichel who's been a monster. Now listen to this. When Erik Karlsson was traded from the Ottawa Senators to the San Jose Sharks, listen to this haul that Karlsson brought in. Josh Norris, Chris Turney, Rudolph Spalsers, Dylan DeMello, a 2019 second-round pick, a 2019 or 2020 conditional first-round pick, a 2021 conditional first or second-round pick, and a 2022 conditional first-round pick. The conditions were as follows. The 2019 second-rounder is the better of San Jose's own or Florida's own previously acquired. If the Sharks miss the playoffs in 2018-2019, the 2019 or 2020 first-rounder will be in 2019. Otherwise, it's a 2020 first-round pick that'll go to Ottawa. If the Sharks re-sign Karlsson, the Senators receive a conditional second-round pick in 2021, which would become a first-round pick if the Sharks make it to the Stanley Cup final in 2019. If Karlsson is on an Eastern Conference roster reserve list during the 2018-2019 season, the Sharks would have to send the Senators an additional first-round pick no later than 2022. So a lot of picks there. Josh Norris is solid, but beyond that, it's a decent return. Ryan O'Reilly from the Buffalo Sabres to the St. Louis Blues led to this package. Vladimir Sobotka, Patrick Berglund, Tage Thompson, a 2019 first-round pick and a 2021 second-round pick. That's another way to do this, too, is to acquire a unicorn. And I know Tage Thompson had an off season this past year, but still brings some intrigue with him with a rocket shot and a ton of size. And if you look at the Tage Thompson portfolio over the last couple of years, he's 26. He's 6'6", 220. He had 29 goals, 27 assists this year, 56 points in 71 games after having 94 points with 47 goals, 47 assists in 2022-2023. He is a perennial 30-goal scorer and is, when he's on, he's a 70, 75-point guy. Now that is, if you can get somebody that sticks in your return, that's what you try to hang your hat on in making this type of a move. Try to get one player that really pops in the return, as opposed to a handful of guys that do okay. If we look at let's try to find a different example here, because there have been a ton of these types of trades over the years that just lead to a bunch of different players being traded, and whether or not they pop is entirely dependent on where they go. Obviously, a big one for the Boston Bruins all the way back in 2013 was Tyler Seguin being traded from Boston to Dallas. in exchange for Louis Eriksson, Joe Morrow, Riley Smith, and Matt Frazier. Sagan still with Dallas. So Dallas getting a solid player there. More than a solid player. So I guess to kind of bring this full circle, there are no shortage of examples of how you can do. And, a good example on the, another player that has been rumored to be on the trade block, Marco Rossi. How about this for the Philadelphia Flyers? A little bit of a different spin on the exact same thing that we're talking about. Cutter Gauthier, who was not going to sign in Philadelphia, was not going to stay. And so the Flyers send him to the Anaheim Ducks. Anaheim sends Jamie Drysdale and his 2025 second-round pick back to Philly. Vancouver sending Bo Horvat to the New York Islanders for Anthony Beauvillier, Atu Ratti, and a 2023 conditional first-round pick. It's an okay return. Basically, my point being here is if we get down to DEFCON 5, if we get down to 11:59 on the Doomsday Clock, you had better be prepared to do something that is going to be a requisite return for a guy who has, as quickly as he has in year 4, as quickly as he has, Kirill Kaprizov has vaulted all the way up to he's probably the best player that has ever put on the Wild uniform. And so if you don't do enough to convince him to stay, you had better get somebody that's going to pop in the return. Because if you don't, then it's going to be a new regime that comes in to try to clean up the mess. So it is on my mind constantly. It should be on Bill Guerin's mind constantly. It should be on Craig Leopold's mind constantly. It should be on the minds of every single person in the organization because it is that important. And if you believe that he already has 2 feet out the door, then you better make sure that you get something good in return. If he still has not made up his mind, you better make sure that you've got things coming up in the organization that are going to convince him to stay. Either way, it's got to be priority number 1. So that is all we've got for today's episode. Again, we'll be with you on Sunday at noon for another edition of LockOn Wild Live. So make sure to tune in then. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy playoff hockey. And we'll talk to you on Sunday. You can find all of our content by subscribing to LockOn Wild. So make sure you like this video and make sure to subscribe if you have not already so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the course of the week. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.